Are you new to Affinity Publisher? If so, you're in luck. Today, we're going to be learning about the top 10 things that beginners want to know how to do inside of Affinity Publisher. After watching this one video, you'll be well on your way to publishing like a pro. Let's get started. So here we are with Publisher all opened up. But before we get started inside of Publisher, I want to show you what we'll be making today. As we learn the top 10 things that beginners want to know, we'll be creating this lovely project together. I've always found that hands-on learning is the best way to get new skills to stick, so make sure you're following along, and you'll have your own lovely document completed by the time this video is over. So, the first thing we need to learn is how to start a new document. When you first open Affinity Publisher, you'll be welcomed with this welcome screen. If you'd like, you could check or uncheck Show this panel on Startup if you'd rather not see this when you open the program. From here, you can click New Document, or you can come to the top of the screen to File, then press New. Now, in this dialog box, we can change the settings of our new document. In this top section right here, we can change a few of the general settings. For example, we can change which type of document this is, if we're going to be printing it commercially, printing it like a photo, for a website, or for a specific device. You can also change the page preset, and for this one, I will choose A4. You can change a few other things here, but for this particular document, let's just come down to number of pages and change this from 1 to 4. To do this, we can click on the side arrow to increase it to 4, or we can click in the box twice, then type in 4, then press Enter, and now we'll have 4 pages when we start our new document. Down here in this section, we have a few more options that we can change. Underneath this layout section, we can give our page exact width and height, change it between portrait and landscape, and check on facing pages. Facing pages just means that while you're working in Affinity Publisher, your pages will be displayed side by side like a book. Now we can go to color, and I don't usually change things in this section because when you change your type, the color format will automatically update to what's best for the type of document that you're using. So if I were to change this to web, this color format would change so that it's best used for the web. I'll leave this as is and move on to margins. Inside of margins, we have a few default measurements that you can use as margins, or you can press Retrieve Margin from Printer if you have a printer hooked up to your computer. And the last section is for bleed. It's a good idea to have about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters for your bleed. So I can click in here and I can type in 3 and then press Enter. And because these boxes are locked together with this icon here, they all update to 3 millimeters. As another handy trick, if I were to click in here and type in 1/8 of an inch and then press Enter, it will be converted to millimeters since that's the document unit that we have this set to. With our document all set up with 4 pages, I'll go ahead and press OK. The next thing that beginners want to know about Affinity Publisher is how to understand the interface. Now that we have a new document set up, we can look through all of the tools and options and figure out what we need to be doing to alter our document. If you come to the very top of the screen, you'll see a menu bar appear. This menu bar includes things like File, which if you click on it, you can create a new document, save this document, or export your document, which are options that we'll learn about later. We also have a help menu up here, which can really come in handy if you get stuck looking for something inside of this program. Below this menu bar, we have another toolbar right here. This toolbar has a few useful tools that you might use while working inside of your documents. Up here, we can find options like snapping, text wrapping, and the other personas that we can use inside this program. If you own Affinity Designer or Affinity Photo, you can access these other personas from within Affinity Publisher. Here's the designer persona, and here's the photo persona. You can see the tools over here change depending on which persona we're inside of. I won't go into too much detail about how to use these personas in this video, but it's good to know where they're located. Over on the left side of the screen, as we just saw, is where all of our tools are located. We can hover over a tool to see its name up here and its shortcut if it has one. For the Move tool, we can see in those brackets that the shortcut is V. To select any of the tools, just click on the tool to select it. There's one tool in here that's a little bit different from the others, and that's our Shape tool. The reason that this tool is different from the others is that there's multiple tools within this one Shape tool. If you can see it right here, there's a tiny gray triangle. If you click directly on that triangle, you'll open up all of the shape tools that we have here inside this program. So right now you can see that I have the triangle tool, but you might see a different shape tool appear there. If it's hard for you to click on the triangle, you can also double-click on this tool to open up all of the other shape tools. As we switch between these different tools, you'll notice that right here, we have a context toolbar, which changes based on which tool we have selected. It gives new options that are specific to the tool that we have. For even more specifics about a tool, you can go to the bottom of the screen, where it will give you directions on how to use the tool, or it might give you different shortcuts you can use with the tool. Next to this status bar, we can also navigate through the pages of our document. If we click on this little arrow, we can switch between our pages. If we click on this last arrow, we can go all the way to our last page of our document. And if we click here, we can go all the way to the first page of our document. The last thing about the interface that we need to go over are all of these panels that you can see. We have panels right here on the left side and over here on the right side. Over on the left side, we have our Pages panel and our Master Pages panel, which allow us to double-click on any area of our document to go to those pages. We can also right-click on the pages to manipulate them, such as adding pages, duplicating, or deleting them. And up here, we have our Master Pages, which we'll go over a little bit later in this video. Over on the right side, we have other panels, like the Color, Swatches, and Stroke panel. Below that, we have our Layers, Character, Paragraph, and Text Styles panels. And below that, we have our Transform, Navigator, and History panels. Each of these panels have specific options that you can use while working in your documents. But these aren't all of the panels, these are just the default panels that Publisher has put out for us to use. If you're looking for a different panel, you can come to the top of the screen to View, Studio, and then you can click on any of these other panels. I'll click on Effects, and you can see we now have an Effects panel added over here. I can click and drag on any of our panels to adjust where they go. I could tuck it up here if I wanted to, or pull it out. And when I'm done with it, I can press on this X to get rid of it. But I can always go back up here to get it out again when I need it. The next thing that beginners to Affinity Publisher want to know is how to use layers and shapes. To get started, I'm going to select our rectangle tool and then click and drag to create a shape. Once you've clicked and dragged to create your shape, you'll notice a few things. First, you'll notice that you have a blue selection box surrounding your shape. This blue selection box means that this shape is selected, so anything that you do will affect the shape. For example, if I came over to the color panel and clicked anywhere in here to change the colors, you can see that the shape is being affected because it's selected. You'll also notice that down here in our Layers panel, we now have a green rectangle. Anything that we add to our document will appear in our Layers panel as a new layer. I'll go ahead and come back over to our Shape tool, and I'll select the Ellipse tool. If I click and drag, we can create an ellipse. As a shortcut, while clicking and dragging, if I hold down Shift, we will now have a perfect circle. I'll release my mouse and then release Shift. You can see that we no longer have a selection box around our rectangle, and now we have one around our circle. I can change the color in the color panel as I did before, and you'll also notice that we now have an ellipse layer in our Layers panel. I'll come back to the shapes once more, and I'll select our Triangle tool. I can click and drag to create a triangle, and if I hold down Shift, it will lock the triangle in place so we don't have a squishy triangle or a super skinny one. I think for this one though, I'll make it look like that. I can change the color one more time. In the Layers panel, you can see that our yellow triangle is on top of our other shapes. I'm going to select the Move tool, which we can use to move our shapes around, to show you why having the triangle on top is important to understand. If I move this triangle, it will appear on top of our other shapes because it's on top in the Layers panel. If I select the circle by clicking on it, you'll notice that it's beneath our yellow triangle but above the rectangle. So if I move this, it will appear above our green rectangle but below our yellow triangle. If we ever want to adjust the positioning of our layers, we can click and drag on our layers in our Layers panel to adjust where they sit in our document. Now, our ellipse is on top of both of these shapes. If you ever want to get rid of one of your layers, you can either have it selected and press Delete on your keyboard, or you can have it selected in the Layers panel and then press on this trash can. The next thing that beginners want to understand inside of Affinity Publisher is how to use colors. We've briefly looked at the color panel to change the main color of these shapes. Every object inside of Publisher will have two colors applied to it, their fill color and their stroke color. If I click on our rectangle, in the color panel, we can see that the fill color is green. The fill color is the object's main color, and it's applied to the center of the object. If I click here, this circle represents the stroke color. The stroke color is the color that's around the border of our shape. I'm going to select the fill color circle and show you that you can change this fill color circle to anything you'd like. You could also press on this little circle right here to give your object no fill. And you could also double-click on this fill color circle to get a more exact color for your object. You can see over here that we can customize the exact amounts of each of these options, or even put in a hex code to get a specific color. Now that we understand the fill a little bit better, let's take a look at the stroke. I'll press on this circle to have our stroke circle selected, but right now it's a little bit hard to see our stroke. To fix this, I'm going to come to our stroke panel and increase the width so we can see what we're talking about when we're using our stroke. Then come back to the color panel. With the stroke of an object, we can affect it just how we did with our fill circle. We can press here to give our stroke no stroke color, and we can adjust what color our stroke appears as in the color wheel. We can even double-click to bring up an exact hue for our colors, just as we did with our fill circle. We can also switch these colors. If we press on this arrow up here, we can switch our fill and stroke colors. Let's go back to the stroke panel to see a few more options. Within this panel, we can affect our stroke even more. You already saw that we can adjust the width of our stroke, but another thing to keep in mind is that we can also check on Scale with Object. This option is important to have checked on if we want to keep the stroke and size of our shape proportional. If I were to resize this shape right now, by hovering over the corner and shrinking it down, you can see that our stroke remains the same size, and as we shrink it down, it looks pretty huge compared to the fill. If I have Scale with Object checked on, and then resize it, the stroke will shrink in proportion to the size of our shape. I'm going to go back to our color panel and give you one more tip when working in the color panel. Right here we have a very important tool called the Color Picker tool. If I click and drag on the color picker, we can select any color in our document to sample it. Once the color is sampled, it will appear right here. Then we can select whatever we want to affect. For example, we might want to change this stroke color, so I'll press on it. Then we can press on the stored color to change that stroke to the exact color of our triangle. To finish off this section, I'm going to make a design using these shapes and the fill and stroke settings. To get started with this, using my rectangle here, I'm going to give it no stroke, and then I'm going to select the fill circle and change its color to black. Then, with the Move tool still selected, I can click and drag on these corners to stretch it across the entirety of our document. You may have noticed at this point that sometimes we have lines appear that help us to snap our object into place. Right now, you can see a green vertical line and a red horizontal line. These are snapping lines, and if you can't see them on your document, make sure that you have snapping turned on up here. Snapping is great for keeping your objects aligned and centered in your documents. Now that we have our black background, I'm going to play with this triangle a little bit to create our design. To do this, I'm first going to make sure that I like this color. So I'll go ahead and adjust this to maybe a little bit more of a golden yellow. And I'm also going to get rid of our stroke. Now I'm going to place this triangle at the very bottom of our document, making sure that it's snapped to the center and to the edge of the bottom. This is a good trick to know. If you ever want to duplicate an object, you can hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard, and then click and drag on your object to duplicate it. I'll release my mouse, and then release Alt or Option. For this duplicate triangle, I want the stroke to be this yellow color, and the fill to have no fill. To do that, I'll come up here, and then press on these arrows to switch our stroke and fill colors. I also can't really see the stroke right now, so I'll go to our stroke panel to increase its width. Once I have it at a width that I think looks good, I'll go ahead and hold down Shift, and then resize this triangle. Then I'll make sure it's centered in the document, and bring it about right here. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option one more time, and then click and drag to duplicate this triangle. For this triangle, I want it to be a little bit smaller, so I'll hold down Shift to keep this proportional. And then I'll click and drag it so that it's aligned with the bottom of our bigger triangle, and it's centered in our document. I'm going to bring down the width of this triangle to 1.5. Then I'll click on this skinnier triangle, and while holding down Alt or Option, I'll click and drag it up here. I'll make sure that it's centered in our document and place it about right there. I also want this triangle to be a little bit bigger, so I'll hold down Shift and then click and drag it out. And with that, we have our design finished for our front cover of our document. The next thing that beginners to Affinity Publisher want to know how to do is how to use the Artistic Text tool. The Artistic Text tool is great for titles and small amounts of text. I'm going to select the Artistic Text tool, which you can find right here in your Tools panel. And then I'll click and drag and begin typing. As you can see, my letters are black, so it's a little hard to see them. I'll click a few times to select all of the letters, or I can click and drag to select them. Then I'll return to our color panel and change their color to white. I'm going to click in our text once, and then press Return to make the text onto 2 lines. Now I can begin adjusting our text. Up at the top in the context toolbar, we have so many options for adjusting our text. We can change the font right here to any font that we think looks good for our title. However, to change the font, we need to make sure that our text is highlighted, or have the Move tool selected, and have the text selected by having a selection box around it. Then I can go back and change the font. Next, we have options like changing the size of our font, but we can also change the size by using the handles on the side of the box. We can also change the alignment of our text right here, which I'll center mine. And then we have even more specific options to change in the character panel. I'll come down here and press on the character panel. At the top of this character panel, we have a few settings that we can change, which we can also change in the context toolbar, so I don't usually come to the character panel to change things like the font or font size. But below all of these options, we have a few things we can change with the positioning. We can change things like the tracking right here by clicking on these arrows to increase it. I'll change mine back to 0. We can also change the letting override for anything that you have on 2 lines. I'll press Command or Control Z to undo that. Or I can click back to Auto to put it back to where it was. Another thing that I noticed about this particular text is that I have a little problem with my F and my I. If I go down to the typography section, I can click here to separate them. As you can see, the character panel has a lot of different options that you can change with your text. I won't be going over all of these options here, but if you'd like to learn more about them, I go into much more detail in my complete beginner's guide to Affinity Publisher, which I'll have linked below. This course is jam-packed with video tutorials just like this one. If you're a beginner, it has everything you need to know all in one place. I worked on this course for a very long time. It's like a child to me. I love it. If you want more videos like this one, go ahead and check it out. The next thing that beginners want to know how to use inside of Affinity Publisher is how to use guides. Before we move on to using guides, I'm just going to select the Move tool and make sure that our title is centered in our document. Then, I'll double-click on page 4, and I'll set up a few guides here on this page. To do that, I'll come up to the top of the screen to View, and then I'll press Guides Manager. In the Guides dialog box, we can add guides to our document that will help us with our alignment when we're setting up text or images inside of our document. To add a guideline, come to the bottom of the horizontal guides column and press here. And you can see that we now have a horizontal guide right here. We can move this by just clicking and dragging, or we can type in an exact measurement of where we want this guideline to sit. We can even change this from a measurement in millimeters to a %. For example, if I wanted this to be exactly 25%, now the line is sitting exactly a quarter of the way down from the top of our document. We can do the same with our vertical guides, which you can see that this one is sitting directly in the center. And we can also change this and type in an exact measurement. If you ever want to delete one of your guides, just have it selected and then press delete. Or if you want to remove all of your guides, just press remove all guides. On the other side of our guides box, we can add column guides. We can come down to columns and then increase the column amount to any number of columns that we want added into our document. We can also change how these columns appear, whether that be this gray filled in column or an outline surrounding your column. I'll change this back to filled and show you that we can also adjust our margins. For example, if you wanted more space on the bottom, you could increase this number to anything you'd like. You can also click and drag on the word bottom to adjust the spacing of that margin. You can actually do this for any of these options, including the number of columns. I'll change this back to 25, and this back to 35. 35. There we go. For now, we don't need these guides on our last page, so I'm going to change the number of columns back to 1, and then press Close. The next thing that beginners to Affinity Publisher want to understand is how to use master pages. To show you how master pages works, I'm first going to come to our master pages panel and double-click on our master pages. By default, these master pages are applied to every page in our document. To show you what this looks like, I'll select the Shape tool and click and drag out a triangle. I'm going to switch these colors so you can see the triangle a little bit better. You can see that because we have a triangle on the left side of our master pages, every left page of our document now has this triangle applied to it. I can do this again on the other side, and now you can see that our right pages have a triangle applied. If I double-click on our cover page, you'll notice that you can't see the triangle. I'll come to our Layers panel and show you that by default, the master page is at the bottom of our layers. Because this rectangle is covering up the master page triangle, you can't actually see it. But if I checked this off, you can now see that just like the other right-hand page, we have a triangle on this page too. If I didn't want a master page applied to this cover page, I could right-click on it and then press Clear Masters. You'll notice that our Master A layer is now gone. Going back to our Master Pages panel, I'll go ahead and delete these triangles by pressing on them and then pressing the trash can. For a more practical way of using master pages, I'm going to add column guides to this page. We already know how to do that. Just come to the top of the screen to view Guides Manager. I'm now going to add 3 columns to each of our pages. And before I close out of this dialog box, I'm going to increase the bottom margin so we have a little bit more space for a page number. Then press Close. It's a little hard to tell, but if we click here, we can see that the main pages of our document now have these column guides applied to them. I'll double-click on our master page again, and now I'm going to add a page number to the bottom of this document. To do that, I'm going to select the Frame Text tool, which is another text tool that we'll talk about in the next section. I'll click and drag down here. Then, to add in a page number, I'm going to come to the top of our screen to Text, down to Insert, Fields, Page Number. We now have a page number inserted into this text box. I'm going to make sure that it's centered. Then I'm going to select our Move tool and center it right here. To duplicate this page number onto the other side of the page, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then click and drag it across. Then I'm going to line it up with our other page number. We now have column guides and page numbers, and I'm just going to add one last thing to our master page. I'm going to come to our Shape tools and select the Rectangle tool. Then, I'll click and drag a rectangle to the bottom of this page. You can see that by default, we have this yellow color applied to our rectangle, which is the exact color of the triangles that we added earlier. If for some reason it didn't turn gold like this color, remember that we can always use the color picker to sample that exact color. Then you can come back to the master page, select your rectangle, and then select the sampled color to make sure that those yellows match. For this particular document, I want to make sure that this master page is being applied to these main pages here, but I actually don't want it applied to our last page. So I'll right-click on this page and then press Clear Masters. The next thing that beginners to Affinity Publisher want to understand is how to use the Frame Text tool. We briefly looked at the Frame Text tool to put in our page number. The Frame Text tool is found right here. It is great to use for large blocks of text. While the Artistic Text tool is great for small amounts of text, the Frame Text tool is great if you ever have large columns of text that you want to include in a document. To show you how this works, I'm going to make sure that we are on pages 2 and 3, which we are, and then I'm going to hover over our column guide and click and drag out a text box over this first column. Now that we have a text box here, we can insert text into it. I can see that it's center aligned right now, so I'm just going to click to make it left aligned. And then I'm going to come to the top of the screen to place text. If you had specific text that you want to put into your document, you can go to File and then Place to place in specific text. I don't have specific text right now, so instead I'm going to go to Text, Insert Filler Text. We can now see that we have our text, and because I left aligned it beforehand, it's perfectly left aligned along the column of our text. I'm going to draw more text frames on these other columns. So make sure you have the Frame Text tool selected, and then you can click and drag text frames across these column guides. If I want the text here to be linked to our other columns, I can press here on this white triangle, and then press on which column I want the text to be connected to. So I'll press here, and now these two columns are connected together. If I were to click on this column and shrink it down, you can see that the text over here is being affected. That's because anything that doesn't fit in this text box anymore is being pushed into that text box. I can continue to link my text frames all the way across the document. And you can see that because they're all linked together, whatever I do to this first one will affect all of them. I'm going to select the Move tool, and with this text box selected, I'm going to come to the Paragraph panel. The Paragraph panel is very similar to the Character panel that we looked at earlier when we were affecting the title of this document. The Paragraph panel is used with the Frame Text tool to affect large blocks of text. Here, we can adjust things like giving our text indents at the beginning of the paragraphs. We can adjust any of our spacing after or before our paragraphs. And just like the Character panel, there are quite a few options in here. The next thing that beginners want to understand in Affinity Publisher is how to put images into their documents. To put a few images into this document, I'm going to use the Place Image tool, which you can find right here in the Tools panel. Press on the Place Image tool, and then you can navigate to where your images are that you'd like to use for your document. In the video description, I have a link where you can find these 3 images to use for this document. I'm going to click on the Buildings image and then press Open. We now have our cursor and it's been loaded with the image. I'm going to press on page number 4, and then with our loaded cursor, I can either click once to insert the image into our document, or I can click and drag to insert this image into our document. Once we have the image inserted, we can move the image around however we think looks good. I'm going to return to pages 2 and 3 and add in our other images. So I'll press the Place Image tool again, and then I'll add in our trees image. I'll click and drag to insert this image. If you ever have an image and you like how it looks, but you wish it was just cropped a little bit differently, you can use the Vector Crop tool. Once you press on this tool, you can bring in any of the sides of your image however you'd like to make it fit better with your project. Then, press the Move tool so you can move the image around again. Right now, we have our text hiding behind the image, so I'll select the text box and bring it down so that we can see all of our text. I'll make sure the columns are snapped together at the same height. And now it's time to put in our last image. This image is a little bit different from our other images because it's a PNG image. This means that our image is actually transparent around the edges of the image, which makes it perfect for text wrapping. I'm going to click up here on text wrapping. And now I can adjust the settings so that the text wraps around our Earth image. I'll press tight for this one. And then down here, I can adjust the distance from text. And I'm going to click here to lock these distances together, and then increase the distances. I can also move the Earth around to see how the text looks and how it's being affected. You might notice some weird gapping here that you're not seeing on this other side. That's because of the alignment of our text. If we wanted this to hug the Earth a little bit closer, we could select the text and then change its justification so that it's justified left. Now we have a nice smooth gap all the way around, but the spacing of our letters looks a little odd. If you're ever going to justify your text in this way, it's a good idea to come to our paragraph panel, then go down to hyphenation and press Use Auto Hyphenation. This gets rid of some of the weird gaps, but there still might be some spacing issues. Feel free to adjust the Earth a little bit more to see if you can improve that spacing. If you still don't like how it looks, you can always change the text back to left aligned. With our document now finished, the last thing that beginners to Affinity Publisher want to know how to do is how to save and export their work. If you want to save this Affinity Publisher file to come back in and work on it later, all you need to do is come to the top of the screen to File, then press Save. Here, you can name your document and then save it to wherever you'd like. This allows you to double-click on this file wherever you've saved it, and it will open up right back inside of Publisher, and you can pick up wherever you left off. I'll press Cancel, and now show you how you can export your document. Come back up to the top to File, and then press Export. You can see up here the different options that you have for exporting. For this one, I'll export it as a PDF. Then, you can decide how much of the document that you want exported. You can use all spreads, all pages individually, or you can type in specific pages that you'd like to export. If this file is for print, be sure to include the bleed so that if you're printing on a commercial printer, you will have that included all the way to the edge of your document. With all of the settings set up how you'd like, you can press Export to export your document. Great work on completing this project! This was just a brief look at how to use Affinity Publisher. If you'd like to learn even more, be sure to check out our complete beginner's guide to Affinity Publisher, which I've left linked in the video description. I'm sure you'll love it, and I can't wait to see you in the course. Bye!